You know, every time you start your car, you're kicking off thousands of tiny, controlled explosions every single minute. It's a super violent place inside that engine. So why doesn't it just turn into a puddle of molten metal? Well, that's where this unsung hero comes in, the engine's cooling system. And today, we're going to dive into exactly how this amazing system works.
No, seriously, think about it. The heat coming off those explosions is just immense. So what's the magic that stops your engine from cooking itself to death, right in the middle of your morning commute? That's the puzzle we're going to solve today. All right, so here's the game plan. First, we'll talk about the problem itself, all that heat. Then we'll follow the coolant's journey, see how the thermostat makes its big decisions, figure out how the radiator gets rid of the heat, and finally, we'll look at some of the cool bonus jobs the system handles.
Okay, Section 1, the problem of heat. Before we get into the solution, we've got to understand the enemy here. And that enemy is just a boatload of heat, all coming from burning fuel.
And listen, the stakes here are incredibly high. Without a cooling system, your engine would overheat, like fast. We're talking metal parts warping out of shape, the oil basically cooking and stop doing its job, and boom, catastrophic failure. It's no joke to say this system is pretty much the engine's life support.
All right, on to Section 2, the coolant's path. So, how does the magic happen? Well, it all kicks off with this special liquid we call coolant. Its whole job is to go on a very important trip to soak up all that dangerous heat and carry it away from the heart of the engine. And this visual right here, it shows you the whole thing perfectly. See that blue stuff? That's the cool coolant flowing into the engine block. It winds its way through all these little passages wrapped around the super hot cylinders, and as it does, it just sucks up the heat. By the time it leaves, it's hot. That's the red coolant you see, and it's ready for the next step.
You know, those little passages actually have a name. It's called the cooling jacket. And that's a great way to think about it. It's like a custom-made liquid coat that's wrapped around the hottest parts of your engine. This is ground zero for that supercritical heat exchange.
So this coolant doesn't just move by itself, right? There has to be something pushing it, and that something is the water pump, which is basically the heart of the whole system. It's powered by the engine itself, and its one and only job is to just keep that coolant flowing, constantly, through this loop. It makes sure no corner of the engine gets left behind to overheat.
Okay, let's move on. Section 3, the thermostat's crucial choice. So the coolant is moving, but where to? Well, that decision comes down to a little device you could call the brain of the operation, the thermostat. It's really just a simple little valve, but it makes a huge choice based on one thing and one thing only, temperature. And this here shows you the two different paths it can send the coolant on. When your engine's cold, right after you start it, the thermostat is closed. It forces the coolant to take a shortcut, a short loop that completely bypasses the radiator. Why? Because you actually want the engine to warm up fast. A cold engine is inefficient, it pollutes more, and the parts wear out faster. So a quick warm-up is key. But once the engine gets hot, boom, the thermostat opens up and sends the coolant on the long trip out to the radiator.
So what's the magic number? Well, the action starts at around 82 degrees Celsius. That's about 180 Fahrenheit. And the thermostat doesn't just, snap open. It's smarter than that. It starts to open gradually, letting just a little bit of that hot coolant mix with the cooler stuff coming back from the radiator. It's all about finding that perfect balance.
But if the engine keeps heating up and hits around 93 Celsius, that's roughly 200 Fahrenheit, the thermostat goes, okay, time for action. It opens all the way up, sending every last drop of coolant on that long loop to the radiator. It completely closes off the shortcut. This is maximum cooling mode.
Which brings us to our next section, the radiator's big chill. We've got all this hot coolant, we've sent it away from the engine, now what? How does the system actually get rid of all that heat? Well, say hello to the radiator. The radiator's job sounds simple, but it is absolutely vital. Its one goal is to transfer all that heat energy from the liquid coolant into the air around it. So, how does it pull off this little bit of thermal magic? Well, its toolkit is actually pretty simple. First, you've got tubes. The hot coolant flows through a whole network of these thin tubes. Then, you have fins. Attached to all those tubes are these little, delicate metal fins, tons of them. Their job is to create a massive surface area for the air to touch. And finally, you have the fan. This is crucial for when you're not moving, like in traffic. It just pulls a ton of air through the whole thing to keep the cooling process going. Okay, but think about this. All this heating and cooling has a big side effect, pressure. I mean, if you've ever boiled a kettle, you know that heating liquid in a sealed space creates a lot of pressure. So how on earth does this system deal with all that stress without, blowing a hose? It's actually a really clever three-step process. So, step 1, the coolant gets hot and expands, and the pressure starts to build. Step 2, the radiator cap, which is way more than just a cap, acts like a safety valve. It lets just enough of that expanded coolant escape into an overflow bottle, the expansion tank. And then, step 3, when you shut the car off and things cool down, a vacuum is created in the system, and it literally sucks that coolant right back in from the tank. Pretty neat, right? Super simple, super effective.
All right, our last section, more than just the engine. Now you might be thinking, okay, it cools the engine, job done. But all that heat it captures is actually a really useful resource, and clever engineers figured out how to put it to work.
This diagram here really shows you the whole shebang. You can see that main loop we've been talking about, engine to radiator and back. But if you look closer, you can see these little side quests, these smaller loops that branch off to do other important jobs for things like the heater core and the EGR cooler. So what are these bonus jobs? Well, the one you've definitely used is your car's heater. That's the heater core. It's just a mini radiator behind your dash that uses hot coolant to warm you up. Pretty cool, huh? The system also helps with emissions by cooling down exhaust gases, and if you've got a turbo, it's even circulating coolant through that to stop the oil inside from turning to sludge. It's a seriously versatile system. And really, that's the main takeaway here. This whole thing is so much more than just a few hoses and a pump. It is, as the source material so perfectly puts it, a precisely engineered thermal management system. Every single piece, from the passages in the engine block to that clever little radiator cap, they all have to work together in perfect sync.
It's this beautiful, synchronized dance of liquid, heat, and pressure, which leaves us with one last, kind of scary thought. What happens when just one tiny part of that dance fails? I mean, if that little thermostat gets stuck closed, your engine can literally cook itself to death. If it sticks open, your engine never really warms up, it just wastes gas and wears itself out. It's a really powerful reminder of just how critical every single piece of this puzzle really is.